taking the time to be here in Guyana. I'm sure that this morning you've had some great presentations and you'll continue over the course of the next day or so to have more presentations of a good quality. I have a speech, but given that we're late, I plan to circulate this speech. I just want to confine myself this afternoon to a few brief remarks. And I hope that it would help in the discussions that you're going to have as we seek to build the model that we all speak of. So this may seem to you a modest beginning, but do not be deterred by modest beginnings. When we started building the low carbon development strategy, we had even a smaller group of people. And we were less resourced at that time. But we managed to build first of all, lay out one of the first low carbon development strategies in the world. And we've been able to be successful. Today we have about 1% of the global forests. We've been able to sell 30% of the forest carbon for about $750 million. So if you extrapolate at the same price, we'd earn about $3 billion from about 1% of the global forest. So in our model building, we focus on a few principles. And the principles were clearly rigorous research at the beginning, rigorous technical work to support the model building. 2, approaching the problem from a jurisdictional scale when we were belabored by the international community to focus on pilots. We recognized that forests could not be preserved unless you preserve all of it. You can't have an oasis in the forest that of good practices and down the road someone else cutting down all the trees. It had to be a jurisdictional scale for it to be successful. And we had to push back against the global community because there was this mood that, oh, let's fund all the pilots around the world. Thirdly, we said, for this to have any value, forest carbon, you had to have a robust monitoring, reporting, and verification system, which we built. And then the 4th principle that we rigorously observed was involvement of locals and ensuring that what we were offering to the global community as a solution did not affect their ability to prosper or take away the force from them as a development tool. And so these are very important principles in laying out the model that we've had. We focus on replicability of the model. And because of all of this, because of the principles, the research, everything else, we've been able to achieve success. So I hope that as we go forward to build a model, we will lay out some of the principles. And as I said before, this is a modest beginning, small numbers of people. We're taking on a big task globally because right now there's no market for even forest carbon, a compliance market, UNFCCC supported compliance market for forest carbon, much less a market for biodiversity services. We recognized early in the model building too that we had to focus on all ecosystem services. If you read the documents of the past from 2006, 2007, in Guyana, you would find that we recognized that water services were important, biodiversity services were important, but we focused only on carbon services because we thought at that time, given the big push to avert climate change, that those would have more value. Since then, we've been struggling to build a compliance market. We've been unsuccessful until now, but because we took a phased approach to the problem, we said, first of all, we'd have a bilateral deal, which we did with Norway, improving the model. Then we'd sell our forest carbon into compliance markets and then integrate fully into international markets. So it was very studied. The funds earned through the LCDS in the beginning, from the first arrangement we had with Norway for $250 million. Over a 5 years period, the sale of forest carbon at $5 per ton. Or we set aside a sum of money to build a center for biodiversity services. That never really happened because we're looking, anyhow, it's too long a history, so I don't want to go back to that, but we were going to use the Biodiversity Center to do two things: to bring the export education services by bringing in the best teachers from around the world to work in Guyana, in this center, and recruit international students to come here. And then the next deliverable from this center would have been to promote research, pharmaceutical companies, etc., using our rich biodiversity. So we were thinking about expanding exports using our rich biodiversity, because the LCDS was about prosperity too, and generating jobs and new exports. It was about a different pathway to development, a non-polluting pathway to development. So that promise or that initiative fit in with the overall concept of the LCDS. So the next principle, so modest beginning is not a problem, but we have to, in model building, we have to make sure that we keep the focus and that we observe some principles that we can sell the model on. The next thing is that we can get buried in the science. Lots of work has been done, great quality work for decades on biodiversity and its preservation. So we can get, if we are not careful, we get buried in the science. I think everyone recognizes already that it's important to preserve the biodiversity. Instinctively, and even if you use your common sense. So that's already a support that you have there. We are here now to look at how we get political support for the initiative, how we can marshal all of these things that have been done before and that we will do into clear, concise arguments that will allow us to get more political support globally. And the political support is necessary if we are going to achieve the target of 30% by 2030. That is crucial. So we have to now not get lost in the science, take everything we've done and what we're going to do, and then make the clear political arguments that would force every policy maker to recognize that this is good for the country and for the planet. Secondly, we're here to get financial support for the initiatives. So two things: political support and financial support. So again, we have to, in this case, we don't need to go jurisdictional scale, because you may have biodiversity hotspots that could be preserved even in a more limited geography. So it's important that we understand what resonates most with whom. I've met a lot of people who are climate skeptics. I've spoken to people in the United States of America who might believe that because we need the United States of America, both on the climate side and on the biodiversity side. People who don't believe that climate change is caused by anthropogenic action. But they're so passionate about preserving biodiversity, the same people. And if that works with them, then fine, because we can achieve the same outcome from a different route. And later, then we come to the climate arguments, because if the forest is there and the forests are dying, and with the consequences for the biodiversity, then we'll ask the next question later, why are the forests dying? Are they dying because the global temperature is heating up? And so if it is heating up, whatever is causing it, we have to do something to abate that. So it is about the focus and thinking about what resonates most with whom. That's how it's going to be effective and in the model building. The next issue is about involvement of locals in the solution and making it clear that sustainability cannot come at the expense of prosperity, that the two have to be linked together. Many people believe internationally, and we had to confront this argument when we were developing the model surrounding forest carbon, and it came out a lot in the international discussions, that we're trading sovereignty over the forest, especially if you have researchers from abroad coming in. And we said no. And so you're going to have, for this to work, we have to have international collaboration. We're signing an MOU with Yale. People have to feel that the work done, they can benefit from the work. The global community would benefit from the work, but they too can benefit from this work. And that it would not come at the expense of their future prosperity. The locals have to feel that way, and they have to feel involved. And then, of course, the trading of sovereignty is a very important issue. So these are just some of the things. I'm not going to go on very long today. I just hope that we can move swiftly in that regard. I just don't want us to get caught up back in the science all the time. We've had a lot of science done. We need to do the science too. A lot of the countries, the developing countries who may have been here, they have very limited capacity to strengthen their legislation, the framework. We have to assist them in doing that. We have to assist them in many initiatives. But that's all I'm going to say today. So thank you very much. I wish you well. I'm going to circulate my speech. Thank you for being here and for leading this too, and President Ali and the others. We really appreciate it, President Duque. This is as I said before, a modest beginning for me, but it's bigger than what we had before. And it's because of the passion and leadership by our president and President Duque and many others who I may not acknowledge here today, that we're here today. It's a great thing, but we need to be focused. For it to be effective, we need to be focused. I think we can be wildly successful if we're focused. Like we had to keep that focus very, very tight when we were building our model, with all sorts of distractions coming along the way. But if you keep the focus tight, we can come up with a product that would be useful, we can get the political buy-in, and we can get financial flows at a scale that would allow us to avert a biodiversity disaster. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Dr. Barrett Jagdeo, for sharing some of your thoughts on the vital importance of overcoming biodiversity loss and setting the context of what will now occur, which would be a signing of a memorandum of understanding between the government of Guyana, represented in the person of Permanent Secretary Ms. Moore, and Ms. Abina Moore, Permanent Secretary, and the Yale Center for Biodiversity and Global Change, who will be represented by Dr. Alexander Killion, Managing Director for the Center of Biodiversity and Global Change, Yale University. The signing will occur at the same position where the declaration was signed this morning. And while they get to their seats, perhaps I could just give you a brief highlight on the tenets of this MOU. So this partnership between the two parties, that being the government of Guyana and the Yale Center for Biodiversity and Global Change, is a long-term collaboration that focuses on biodiversity data, biodiversity technologies, and biodiversity science and technology training. The collaboration will support Guyana's work in the establishment of the Global Biodiversity Alliance and a Biodiversity Research Center of Excellence, which will see the application of these data and tools for conservation impact and decision-making. The collaboration will include, but not be limited to, work together on Guyana's leadership on the Global Biodiversity Alliance, with the Yale Center for Biodiversity being a core scientific partner, collaborative thought leadership for the establishment of an international center for excellence for biodiversity research in Guyana under Guyana's direction. The Yale Center for Biodiversity will provide scientific and organizational guidance in areas of leadership, strategy, and scientific processes. One of the third aims of this MOU is the application of the Yale Center for Biodiversity science and tools to support Guyana's decision-making around protected areas, their expansion to 30% by 2030, and the broader low-carbon development strategies, including a national biodiversity information system comprising data dashboards and a geographic information system and biodiversity data layers. The parties will provide scientific, technical, and strategic support for leveraging the Yale Center for Biodiversity's National Biodiversity Information System that will inform on-the-ground monitoring. I believe the signing is now complete. Could we have a photograph? No photograph. Okay. So Mrs. Abina Moore is the Permanent Secretary in the Office of the President, Government of Guyana, and signing on behalf of the parties of the Government of Guyana and on behalf of the Center for Biodiversity and Global Change, Yale University, Dr. Alexander Killion. The Ambassador of the United States of America to the Government of Guyana, Ambassador Theroux, Nicole Theroux, has joined the picture, as well as Mr. Kevin Hogan and Ms. Pradeepa Bolanot on behalf of the Government of Guyana. Congratulations. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you may see that there's a break on the program, but of course, since you just had lunch, we will proceed. especially because we're quite adrift with the time. And so I'm preparing to hand over to my colleague Kevin Hogan, who's advisor to the President Dr. Irfan Ali, Government of Guyana, on climate change issues. And he will speak on Guyana's journey from a national vision to hosting the Biodiversity Summit and how that reflects a strategic evolution marked by key milestones, leadership, and impactful partnerships that has shaped Guyana's emergence as a global platform for action. And indeed, now that the Vice President has left the room, perhaps I could talk a little bit about him, but he's really been a champion and a person behind the low carbon development strategy, the initial version. Okay. I've just advised that the concurrent session of this summit will commence now. So those persons who wish to join, sorry, I'm just trying to be a bit lighthearted because we've all had a long day, and I'm just trying to keep us all focused. So the parallel session, the first being on the topic Innovative Tools for Research and Monitoring, will start very shortly in the Lula Room, which is on the eastern side of this building. So if anyone wishes to join that parallel session moderated by Dr. Priya Maraj, I encourage you to step out now, but do return as soon as that session is finished, or if you wish to continue on the subject of conservation perspectives through the lens of gender, youth, and traditional knowledge leaders. Over to Kevin Hogan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vanessa. And I tried to jump in quickly because I know that she was trying to get everybody out of the room before I speak. So welcome to my world. Maybe I should give a chance to people who do actually want to leave. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Kevin Hogan. I have had the privilege of working on Guyana's low carbon development strategy for a horrifically long time. I've been really lucky. I worked for the Vice President when he was President, so I saw the vision that he was speaking about. And I'm very lucky now because I work for the current President and get to see him in action around the world and implementing the vision of the LCDS. It's not often that I speak straight after the Vice President, but what's great is he actually gave quite a few of the points I was going to make, so I will be able to gloss over some of those because you've heard it from a far more authoritative source than me. But what I'll just try and do is to set out where the LCDS came from and how we got to today, because one of the points that the Vice President made very strongly was we're privileged to have started from small beginnings, but to have done something which we believe was quite big. And it acts as a platform for why we're here today, because as the Vice President said, biodiversity was always in the LCDS. The idea was we would start with carbon and get to the other ecosystem services over time. So the Vice President made the points in a political and very high level way. I'm going to try and bring them down a level. For those of you who are new to Guyana, this is what Guyana looks like. It's not like what you'll see in the streets around here. It's big, it's huge mountains, it's forests. So when we talk about the biodiversity, it's a huge thing. The top of Mount, if any of you have heard or watched the movie Jurassic Park was first mentioned in a novel by Arthur Conan Doyle, where he referred to the Jurassic Park at the top of Mount Roraima in the south of Guyana on the border with Brazil and Venezuela. Now, obviously, there weren't dinosaurs there, but there was an entire different ecosystem at the top of this mountain in Guyana. So this contains lots of species, lots of biodiversity that you will find nowhere else in Guyana or in the world, and it's due to the formation over billions of years. So Arthur Conan Doyle, 200 years ago, was talking about biodiversity in Guyana. And so how did we, this is a very clicky thing. Okay. You're seeing all my punchlines. Oh, right. There we go. it's all about VIPs. And I know we have had a lot of VIPs here today. In fact, we've had plenty of VVIPs. But what I refer to is vision, implementation, and partnerships, which have been the hallmark of the LCDS since day one, and which provide us for the platform for why we're here today. So I'll just go very quickly through it. I've had lots of people over the years ask me, when did the Vice President first come up with the vision? And it's actually quite hard to pinpoint today. There were a few private conversations, there were a few conversations with other world leaders. But in terms of a public statement, this is one from a United Nations speech to the General Assembly back in 2009. So I just put that up here, and I'm going to read it out. It's the only slide I'm going to read out, because this is the genesis of why we're here today. There's no solution to climate change without action on forests. The people of Guyana identified this long time ago. As a country where most of our territory is rainforest, we don't want to just despair, we want to do something about it. So we proposed two ideas. One, we're willing to create a global model for national scale action. And two, we'll use the payments to receive to invest in a low carbon economy. We can provide an example of what it takes to forge a successful low deforestation climate resilient economy. That's pretty conventional wisdom today, but it was not in 2009. And actually the vision really started probably 2 years before that. And this was at its essence. Forests are worth more dead than alive. Amazon.com, this morning I checked, because I knew I was going to make this point, was worth $2.4 trillion this morning. But most of the world's forests left standing are worth very little. Now, Amazon.com does great things. It's a great company. I'm sure most of us in this room use it in one way or another. So we pay it for its services. But we get an awful lot more from the global forest, the actual Amazon, plus forests in Africa, Asia, etc., etc. So that was the fundamental premise. And this is the original LCDS. These 14 pages, that's it. And there's lots of pictures in it. It's probably only 7 pages of text. But this was the first time that the Vice President's vision was put into more than just a speech. But it was humble beginnings, as he said. We couldn't get any attention. We knew it was right. The vision was there, but we didn't get attention. The Vice President talked about modest beginnings, in this room being modest beginnings, but it was even more modest back then. Until a British newspaper came and spoke with the Vice President at some length. And the journalist phoned me up the night before they printed it saying, oh my God, they put a nightmare headline on the thing. And they did, because the headline was, take over our rainforest, which of course was not at all what he said. And I think I'm the only person in the world that still has a copy of this paper. As you can see, it's getting a bit ragged. And yeah, the front page, the headline wasn't great. I was at a wedding when I picked it up from the newsagents. But the 2 pages, page 2 and 3, within the article, a groundbreaking step in the battle against climate change. That was the moment that the door started to open. It wasn't just the president of a South American country, a small enough South American country with a big vision. People were starting to take notice. And I could go on and on about what this newspaper article did. It was actually very positive. But I'll just select a couple of moments that were more breakthrough moments. It started to get attention. This is the current King of England, King Charles, when he was the Prince. But he was at a major function in London. I was privileged enough to be there and heard him say these words, where he said, and he was talking about the importance of saving the world's rainforests. Perhaps one of the most optimistic developments is the leadership shown by President Jagdeo of Guyana. We cannot afford to lose this opportunity to demonstrate what can be done. I said I wasn't going to read out any more quotes, but I just did. But the door opened a little bit more when we got this, because the LCDS went from these 14 pages to this as a result of that speech. LCDS, we're now up to, I should have checked, 57 pages. And this contains analysis of the ecosystem services of the forest. It contains a lot more technical work. And actually, this piece of work was also mentioned in that speech, and there's a backstory to it, which kept me at the reception tonight, and I might tell. More. Then it became this, which is the next one. By this stage, we were into hundreds of pages, because it wasn't just the document itself, it was all the work below it. And crucial to it was we finally had an assessment of the ecosystem services evaluation, where we knew we were providing up to $40 billion in value to the world, but we could, in theory, get $580 million if we lost the forest. And no one was ever saying we're going to lose the forest, but that's what it was worth. That's what the world economy was saying it was worth. That started to get picked up. This was a report by the British government which started to pick up on it. And the door was really wide open now. And that led to this, which is the signing of the Guyana-Norway Agreement. That was, on top of the vision, probably the biggest single breakthrough moment. That's in Iwikrama, where I know some of you are going on Friday. And by the way, the front page of this newspaper is also in Iwikrama, where some of you are going on Friday, so you can retrace the steps of the story. And that ultimately led to this, which is today's LCDS. Because in 2022, His Excellency President Ali took up the mantle and ran with it even harder, even faster, and with an even more expanded vision. But the reason I wanted to go through that is to show that there is a trail from that speech of the United Nations in 2009 up to today, and there was a lot of work beneath it. So that's the vision. The implementation, we've heard lots of these numbers today. We know it's one of the 9 jurisdictions in the Amazon. It's the size of England and Scotland combined, 18 million hectares, 99%. You've heard all of these, so I'm not going to go through them. But put another way, these are globally relevant forest climate services. And so this is what we narrowed in on. We started with ecosystem services more broadly. We categorized them as climate services, biodiversity services, and water management services. Maybe we categorize them a bit differently today, but we narrowed in on this one. So we conserve, we hold about 15 gigatons of carbon, we remove about 154 million tons a year, we reduce, we haven't got much to reduce because it's so low, and then there's some to restore. That's how we explain it in the LCDS. But to put it a bit differently, these are 2 countries that are roughly the same size, the United Kingdom and Guyana. The UK, not unreasonably, prides itself as a leader on climate change. Guyana also, I believe, not without cause, claims to be a leader in climate change. So 2 countries, roughly the same size, claiming to be leaders in climate change. The UK has decarbonized its economy more than any other G7 country. It's done a very, very good job. But if you accumulate all the emissions reductions that the United Kingdom has achieved ever, I'm underlining that word ever, which basically means since 1990, the Industrial Revolution started in the UK, they started the emissions story, became rich, it peaked in 1990, and it's been basically coming down ever since. If you accumulate everything that has happened, it's in the region of 6 gigatons. Guyana's forest stores more than 3 times that. So if you lost, say, a third of Guyana's forests, which would not be unrealistic over, say, 20 years, you'd wipe out all the success that a similarly sized country on the other side of the world has done. And the UK has spent trillions and trillions of dollars in order to do that. Huge political heavy lift, as we see in countries around the world where it now comes under threat. Imagine undermining that by not focusing on forests. So how to do it, how to build a model. We said, and the Vice President trailed this, we had 3 phases. And if you go back to the early documents, not quite the 14-pager, but the ones shortly after that, it was always around these phases. Start with a bilateral, with a partner that shares our vision, move to the voluntary and compliance markets, and move to what we would now call Article 6 markets within the United Nations. Article 6 comes from the Paris Agreement. There was no Paris Agreement back then, but it was essentially the same message. And what's at the bottom, which you may not be able to read in blue, is we would receive payments under the bilateral with Norway, and later we would receive payments for carbon credits, and then we would invest them in the LCDS in green. So that's what's happened. Guyana, Norway was a very simple model, modeled on what they were doing in Brazil, and it led to payments of $227 million in the end, which were invested in the LCDS. Revenue from valuing these things is not abstract. We've heard it time and time again today. But in Ghana, literally what it meant was jobs and support for micro enterprise. It meant land titling indigenous communities. It meant renewable energy and solar in the hinterland. It meant a development fund for indigenous communities. It meant ICT hubs in over 200 villages and communities around the country. And it meant new canals in climate adaptation, which is one of the investments. Some of these investments are now reaching conclusion, but all of them came from the earnings that communities and the country made from the sale of ecosystem services. So this is not a theoretical abstract thing. You go into a village in Guyana and people will be able to explain it to you better than I can. So that was Norway. Phase 2 was integration into voluntary and compliance markets. We had to choose a standard that matched the vision. We chose our trees. There's only 2 jurisdictional RED standards in the world today, one from the World Bank called FCPF and one called our trees. We chose our trees, and it's generating about 8 million credits a year. We were the first country in the world to issue jurisdictional scale in 2022. We were the first country in the world to sell those credits. A lot of attention is made to the fantastic deal with Hessen. Recognition to Sunina over there. A minimum of 750 million. But what sometimes gets lost is there's been more since. And it's the world's first sale of CORSIA Phase 1 eligible credits, which means they're sellable in the compliance markets, specifically the aviation compliance market. So we went from a vision to implementation through a bilateral with Norway to voluntary markets to now compliance markets. Sales are continuing. Guyana sold to Apple. Guyana sold to over 15 airlines in association with Mercuria Expansive and IATA. We're selling credits at $23.25 in the market today. And again, as with Guyana and Norway, it's real. These watermelons are from a village in the hinterlands where they planted a watermelon farm with the revenue they made from the payments for what they had done. About 20% of income from revenue is directly accessed by communities, and in this community they did that. But 100% is invested in the LCDS overall, which is something that sometimes gets lost. And it's at the national scale about aligning not just food, climate security, but food security and energy security, opening up non-forested land with some of the revenues as well. And just to be complete, Phase 3 is about that further integration with the United Nations framework as it emerges. As the Vice President alluded, that's taking quite a long time. So we weren't going to wait for that. We were going to be the model and move ahead. So just to conclude, 16 years progress, plenty of setbacks. The Vice President politely referred to some of them. It wasn't all smooth sailing. But the 3 fundamental points of vision, implementation, and partnership stayed the same. And that's where we are today under the leadership of President Ali. Much of what we were doing already around forest carbon, around adaptation, around energy, around indigenous development, around adaptation is continuing. But what's so exciting for me to see is that the biodiversity piece, the urban development piece, and the water management piece specifically are all now moving. And to put another way, the LCDS was always about ecosystem services. It was about biodiversity, water management, and climate services, as the Vice President said earlier on. For realpolitik reasons, we focused on climate to start. But now here we are focusing on the new focus, the expanded focus that's in this, which includes the focus on biodiversity. And that's why we're here today. So I wanted to just go through that as a slightly more detailed narrative to something that many of you already know as to where today came about. And so that's why we're here. So over to you. But just to conclude on a personal note, as I said, I've been around this from the start. I've been privileged to hold the bag of the people who are making it happen. And I was reflecting in the last 24 hours on the difference of 16 years ago and today. And I was going to make a point about we are today on biodiversity where we were 16 years ago in climate, but that's actually wrong. We're in a much better place because the vision is really rounded out now. President Ali's expanded vision is tremendous. The implementation capacity, for those of you who are not from Guyana, do not underestimate Guyana's capacity to get stuff done. It is amazing. None of this would have happened without Vanessa, Nick, Pradeepa, all the people who are really the brains behind the detailed work that supports the president's vision, both the old president and the new vision. So the implementation is stronger than it ever was, and that's different. But the thing that's really different, and the thing that really struck me last night, is the partnerships. You probably guessed from some of those early slides, it was pretty lonely in the early days. The president had this amazing vision, but why would Guyana be able to lead the world? Why would a country in South America be able to? That's what we dealt with. That literally is what we dealt with. But today, that's no longer the case. And the fact that so many amazing people are here makes me realize it's different to 16 years ago. It fills me with immense excitement and hope. And As I said, it was a long 16 years, but feel much better about the potential for the future. But it's over to you now. So thank you very much.
Does anyone wish to pose any question to Kevin? Nobody wants to ask Kevin a question. Okay, he's always very comprehensive. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will continue with the program for this afternoon, and we will now go into the plenary, where various organizations will share very short and succinct messages and technical insights. These will be global experts, organizations, and stakeholder groups, and they will highlight the actions that protect and restore biodiversity in alignment with the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework. We encourage them to share their vision and how they anticipate the summit, the outcomes of the summit would be, and what follow-up actions could be taken. So may I please call, oh, there's a video message, a recorded message. Could we please have that? Thank you. From Ms. Shalike Siltshena, Head of Science, Policy and Governance, Secretariat of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, the UNCBD. Thank you.
Your Excellency, President Ali, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, I bring you greetings from the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. My name is Sakile Silichena, and I'm the Head of Science, Policy and Governance at the Secretariat. When the parties adopted the Convention on Biological Diversity in 1992 at the Rio Summit, they committed to three main objectives: the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of components of biodiversity, and access to and benefit sharing to help the implementation of the convention. Since then, the biodiversity crisis has become more critical, and this is reflected in the accelerated efforts towards implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This was adopted by 196 parties at COP15 in Montreal, and it reaffirms the commitments of the Rio Summit. Similarly, this inaugural Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit, as a critical catalyst in global efforts to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, and we thank the government of Guyana for its leadership. The Alliance's focus on knowledge sharing, bringing attention towards the biodiversity climate nexus, and innovative financing seeks to enable new initiatives and scalable solutions to address biodiversity loss in a way that reinforces ambition of the GBF. Successful implementation of the GBF requires a whole of government and a whole of society approach. And it is precisely the kind of international collaboration that this gathering will foster across the next 2 days that is important in order to help accelerate implementation of the framework. Although the Executive Secretary's agenda prevents her from attending in person, the Secretariat of the CBD stands ready to engage actively. Let us seize this moment to accelerate the GBF's implementation and to translate commitments into tangible, people-centered results on the ground. I wish you a productive and successful summit. Thank you.
Yeah, we extend our thanks to the UNCBD, and now we call on Dr. Killian again. He will speak on behalf of the Yale Center for Biodiversity and Global Climate Change, with whom we just signed the MOU. Over to you. Yes, you can come here, please.
Hello, everybody. It's an honor to be here today. And on the behalf of the Yale Center for Biodiversity and Global Change and Map of Life, I'd like to express our appreciation for the opportunity to collaborate with a country that is leading the world in aligning economic development with the protection of nature. We are here today because we do share a vision, similar to what was said previously, a future where biodiversity is not only protected, but properly valued. Valued socially, economically, but potentially most importantly right now, scientifically. That future depends on one essential pillar: transparent, science-based measurement and assessment. Without it, markets cannot function effectively. Without it, policy cannot be held accountable. Without it, the value of nature remains invisible and ultimately at risk. That's why our partnership with the government of Guyana is so exciting. Together, we have developed the beginnings of the Guyana Biodiversity Information System. It's a first of its kind integrated platform designed to be the country's convening system for biodiversity intelligence. This system will integrate data and insights from across government agencies, local and indigenous communities, the private sector, NGOs, research institutions, and many others. It's designed to be open, it's designed to be adaptive and credible because those are the necessities of an effective biodiversity market. This work directly supports Guyana's low carbon development strategy by building a reliable and inclusive foundation for biodiversity data. We are helping to ensure that nature's value can be measured and rewarded fairly and sustainably. Systems that support financial mechanisms for biodiversity cannot be built on aspirations alone. They require real infrastructure, real data, and real partnerships. With the launch of this platform and with the formalization of our partnership today, we are laying that foundation together with many partners. And I'd like to highlight one of those partners as an important connector, and that being the Field Museum. That being Nigel up there. To the Global Biodiversity Alliance, we hope that what we are building together in Guyana can inspire and inform other biodiversity-rich countries in the Global Biodiversity Alliance. This country can inspire and inform other places and develop a model where transparent science, national ownership, and inclusive data systems form the backbone of how biodiversity is valued, not just ecologically, but economically and socially as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Killian, and we do look forward to strengthening our partnership with the Yale Center for Biodiversity and Global Change. Now, may I please call to the podium Dr. Erin Hagan, Senior Director of the Keller Science Action Center for the Chicago Field Museum.
Hello, everyone. It's really an honor for me to be here to represent Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History here at Guyana's call for a Global Biodiversity Alliance. As a natural history museum, we're a bit of a different type of a conservation actor. We're not an NGO and we're not a university. We're actually curators of some of the world's greatest natural and cultural treasures. And we partner with people everywhere that are looking to preserve these treasures in perpetuity. The Field Museum has been working in Guyana for over a century. Back in 1922, Field Museum scientists began exploring different regions of the country, from the New River to the Rupununi savannas. Back then, our museum, as well as many in the global north, had a colonial mindset. We would come to the country, identify interesting specimens, box them up, and ship them to Chicago, because we thought that in Chicago, that's where the real experts were. Today, we do things very differently. Today, we know that the real treasures aren't actually the specimens, but the forests, rivers, and mountains that they come from. The real treasures are the people who know those landscapes best. And the real experts are not in Chicago, but they're right here along the rivers and in the savannas and all across the landscapes that you all know. So last year, when the Guyana's Protected Areas Commission invited the Field Museum to inventory biodiversity in a large tract of forest between the Essequibo and New Rivers, we were excited to activate an approach that we've used in many countries. We started that approach by doing what we are used to doing and really activating partnerships with experts. Not experts in Chicago, but experts here in Guyana. We've worked with experts from 3 indigenous communities surrounding the area, experts from the Guyanese government, from the University of Guyana, as well as Guyanese NGOs. And then we work together to identify methodologies for sampling. Some of those are tried and true methods that really have not changed since we were here in the 1900s. And others relied on emerging technologies, modeling, as well as artificial intelligence to give us different perspectives of the information that we can gain from an area. And then we really set to work. We relied on our teamwork and centered those who know most about these landscapes. 3/4 of our team were Guyanese. And 8 months ago, we completed that inventory, and on behalf of that large and diverse team, I'm really proud to announce the launch of our full report. The area we visited is a spectacular wilderness of forests, rivers, and mountains that stretch more than half the length of Guyana. It's a place whose long history of indigenous stewardship is literally written in stone in ancient petroglyphs along the rocks of the rivers. This area is a magnificent illustration of Guyana's success in protecting its forests to date, and also provides a real example of the opportunity that Guyana has to create a new model for conservation as well. And so throughout these next 2 days, we really look forward to sharing more with you, and also brainstorming and thinking through activities that we can do to really scale the effects for biodiversity conservation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hagan. We do appreciate the continued work of the Chicago Field Museum in Guyana. Now I call to the podium Mr. Matthew Swift. Matthew, you're the co-founder and president and CEO of Concordia. It's my pleasure to invite you to the podium.
Thank you very, very much. It is such an honor to be back in Guyana. This is my 3rd visit to the country. And when I was looking through the priorities of this meeting, there was one element that really stuck out to me based on what I've done my entire career in co-founding Concordia Summit, which is around visibility, around convening, around raising awareness. And I want to commend President Ali for his vision, his commitment to this cause, number one. Number two, I want to commend him for the approach that feels different from so many other engagements that I've either convened or listened to from heads of state when talking about this issue specifically. And the element of practicality to it, the element of private sector engagement to it, I think is very, very strong and very important and very relevant for this time. One of the things that's going to make this alliance, one of the things that's going to make this convening a success is the extent to which we can bring people who we might sit and think they don't care about environmental issues, but I would argue it's that they don't understand them. And how do you change that? I've started Concordia 15 years ago with one of my closest friends. We've hosted 52 summits over those last 15 years, including our annual summit in New York, which is now the largest summit at the same time as the United Nations General Assembly. And I will tell you, there is a distinct difference between an audience that is against something versus an audience that doesn't understand something. And so to the extent that this gathering in this group, when it comes to raising awareness, when it comes to that urgent need to explain the issues that countries like Guyana are facing right on the front lines, I think the most important thing in the area that I have worked my entire career on is to take what we learned from a gathering like this and from the Alliance and go to new audiences, go to other groups, and especially go to leaders of the private sector and demonstrate the pragmatic, practical elements that connect very, very well to the power that the private sector can bring towards solutions, and certainly in collaboration with government. Last year, we hosted the Concordia Amazonas Summit here in Guyana. And through all my travels, and when I talk, I love talking about this country to people because I find the story so unique, the time so interesting, the opportunity so profound. And so we brought the Concordia Amazonas Summit, which is chaired by President Ivan Duque. And President Duque, who has played an integral part in the creation of Concordia, the success of Concordia, he was with us at the very, very beginning when Concordia was simply an idea on a piece of paper. But when we developed the original concept for the Amazonas Summit, bringing private sector leaders especially, but of course public sector leaders, not just to a place to talk about the Amazon rainforest, but to do it in the Amazon rainforest, there was no question that Guyana had to be a key part of that. And so my commitment from Concordia's perspective is, one, we will never forget Guyana. At all of our summits around the world, we will talk about this country, this opportunity, and this commitment, especially from this government throughout. Two, I will always pledge for any of you that, and look at this as an open invitation to any Concordia Summit, that I will always bring to the table an audience that might be skeptical, but with further education and awareness will change their approach on these issues around the environment, conservation, sustainability, and biodiversity, of course. So with that, thank you, congratulations on everything you've done. This is a fantastic gathering, and I know many more to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, and President Duque and the entire Concordia team for your continued support and partnership to our work. We do appreciate it. So now we will hear from the Principal Executive for Ecosystems and Biodiversity, the Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, or CAF, Mr. Mauricio Velasquez. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As a development bank serving Latin American and the Caribbean countries, we recognize that our region harbors over 40% of the planet's biodiversity. We're very rich. We have a natural wealth that supports our economies, cultural heritage, and climate resilience. Yet this biodiversity is undergoing threat from land conversion, pollution, and unsustainable uses. In alignment with the global biodiversity framework, we're committed to supporting transformative actions that halt biodiversity loss and drive nature-positive development. Our vision is a region where biodiversity is not just protected, but restored, where natural capital is embedded in economic planning, where indigenous knowledge guides stewardship, and where finance flows towards sustainable, inclusive outcomes. Our actions, well, we have been in several COPs. Somebody mentioned good COPs and bad COPs. Well, in good COPs, and we have made over there many pledges, and we have accomplished them. For example, we are expanding green and blue financing tools from biodiversity bonds to debt for nature swaps in El Salvador during the last year for Rio Lempa or Lempa River. To unlock capital for conservation and sustainable land use, we aim to mobilize at least $1.5 billion in biodiversity finance annually until 2026. Last year we attained 1.1 billion. We are close of the goal. We have a blue finance goal of $2.5 billion until 2030 and $25 billion of green finance until 2030 also. We are working through technical support and data platforms that we want that they help countries to integrate ecosystem valuation and spatial planning into their national development strategies. Besides, we are working in nature-based solution for climate resilience. We have a goal to mobilize, at least in the region, $15 million until 2030. Our region has the opportunity and the responsibility to lead by example. The people of Guyana is a clear example of that. By aligning our development agenda with the global biodiversity framework, we are investing not only in nature, but in our shared future. Thank you very much.
We thank you, Mr. Velasquez. And now we have been hearing from some of the international organizations. We will now pivot to Guyana, to the Environmental Protection Agency, which will be represented by Mr. Kemraj Parasram, the Executive Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon all. President Duque, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, and friends, good afternoon. And I hope this works. Allow me to take you for a brief moment into the soul of a country where biodiversity conservation is not just a goal, it is a way of life. In Guyana, the story begins on our coastline where the Atlantic Ocean kisses mudflats and mangrove forests that stand as nature's frontline defenders. And beneath their roots, young fish find refuge, and above them, scarlet ibises streak across the sky like fire. Then venture inland, and rivers carry you to wetlands, coastal lakes, and village conservancies, alive with the rhythm of tradition and community. And just beyond that, rainforest cathedrals rise in rolling hills and mountains, home to jaguars, the harpy eagles, and orchids blooming in the shadows. Then further south, the Rupununi savannas that stretches wide under an open sky where giant anteaters roam and arapaima linger in the Rupununi River. And high in the clouds to the west, the Tupui Mountains rise like ancient monuments, sheltering species that exist nowhere else on Earth. This is Guyana, my home, our home as Guyanese all. A nation where ecosystems from sea to savanna, rainforest to the mountaintop are still intact, still connected, and still functioning at scale. And in the words of His Excellency President Mohamed Irfan Ali, Guyana's biodiversity punches above its weight in the global arena. And someone a few months ago mentioned, I think someone from WWF mentioned to me, in attempting to reach 30 by 30, Guyana, in essence, has already done that, if 85% of our forest is already intact. However, over the last 3 decades, Guyana has taken bold, deliberate action to protect what much of the world has already lost. In the 1990s, we passed the Environmental Protection Act and established the EPA, not to constrain development, but to guide it wisely. We launched the Ukrama Rainforest Project, 371,000 hectares of sustainably managed forests, co-governed with indigenous communities and globally recognized as a living laboratory for conservation and livelihoods. We went on further and built a national protected area system, expanding coverage from just over 8% of our landmass, including the icons like the Kaichor Falls, Shell Beach, and Kanishan, our first indigenous governed protected area. And we are now doubling this and advancing towards 30 by 30 goal through other effective area-based conservation measures and biocultural zones rooted in traditional stewardship. And of course, you heard from His Excellency and from Kevin about the low carbon development strategy and the carbon credits. What I want to highlight today is that we have restored over 500 hectares of mangroves along our coastline, particularly with help from the EU. And also legacy mined out landscapes. We have mining in Guyana. And through our National Forest Restoration Initiative, we have restored, or we are now building on that restoration initiative. We are now also moving beyond carbon into biodiversity markets, and you would have heard much of that already from His Excellency and from VP. But importantly, through groundbreaking community-led innovation, we are pioneering a biocrediting framework in the Rupununi by testing and validating 6 biodiversity monitoring methods: eDNA, camera traps, acoustic sensors, fish stock assessments, bird counts, and traditional ecological knowledge. And this has been led by the Wildlife Commission and with the help of FAO. This is not just a pilot, it is a prototype to the world, showing that biodiversity credits can be science-based, community-powered, and integrated into local livelihoods. The biodiversity data generated is feeding directly into a new generation of nature credits. Recently, we've also received approval for a US $4 million JEF full-size project on biodiversity credit development and forest ecosystem restoration. This project will drive large-scale restoration in mined-out lands and deepen our national architecture for biodiversity credit markets, anchored in equity, scientific rigor, and benefit sharing. Now, these efforts are made possible by strong institutions like the EPA, the Guyana Forestry Commission, the Protected Areas Commission, the Guyana Wildlife Conservation and Management Authority, and the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, ensuring that biodiversity is not simply protected, but continuously monitored, integrated, and valued across all sectors: mining, oil and gas, forestry, and agriculture. Excitingly, we are now going further. We're expanding our remote real-time monitoring system, and yes, we have that. We have a partnership with Maxar Technologies, facilitated by the US Embassy, and we're now 2 years into this, where we can task a satellite and fly over the FPSOs offshore and see what is going on, and detect oil spills. We're looking to expand this satellite data technology, and we're here tomorrow. We'll talk about with Indian Space Research Organization about their capabilities, the EU Copernicus. All these we're looking to bring into a national biodiversity observatory. And importantly, a digital twin of our world-class biodiversity. We're conceptualizing this, and we want to make this happen. And in fact, if you have the time this afternoon, take a look at our booth, our combined booth outside. And we had, from the visitors there, already saying they're all excited about this digital twin. And we're looking for partners as well. So please, listen. Our actions, and finally, our actions are fully aligned with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We're currently updating our National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan with 21 revised national targets covering the following key areas: protecting 30% of our land and marine ecosystems through ECMs, restoring approximately 200,000 hectares of mined-out lands, mainstreaming biodiversity into all sectors, reducing pollution and plastic waste, and building a circular economy. And of course, developing a market for biodiversity credits and other payment for ecosystem services. We're also investing in education, indigenous knowledge, community resilience and public awareness, community wildlife conflict management, and legal reforms that include biosafety rules, marine mammal protection, and controls against illegal fishing. And in closing, what do we expect from this summit? We expect a renewed energy towards meeting the 30 by 30 target with integrity. We expect innovation in biodiversity finance, rooted in transparency, inclusion, and equity. And we expect bold partnerships to scale up monitoring systems and biodiversity intelligence. And we call on the global community to support valuation of our biodiversity and at the global level, not as an abstract ideal, but as real capital, real infrastructure, real planetary insurance. Colleagues all, this is our chance, not just to speak for nature, but to act for it. Guyana may be small, but our ecosystems still thrive. Our vision is clear, our commitment is proven. Now we invite the world to walk with us. Let this summit be a symbolic, not just be symbolic, but transformational. Let us go from urgency to unity, from ambition to action, from loss to a lasting legacy. Guyana is ready. Let us build this alliance together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kemraj. I was happy to see that visual aspect of your presentation, which indeed reminds us of why we're all here, what we're trying to conserve, and indeed what we're trying to protect. And reflecting on what was in that presentation, I thought it gave me a good opportunity to say to all delegates that there is the opportunity still for those persons who are interested in taking any of the field trips. There are 2 on offer if you haven't registered as yet. But particularly for the foreign delegates, you'll be here on Friday. There are 2 tours. One to the Mahaika River tour, the Mahaika River, which gives you the opportunity to see some of our coastland, the agriculture, a bit of exposure to the different types of culture, the landscape, including the mangroves. And when you go on the river itself, you will have the wonderful opportunity of seeing our national bird, the kanji pheasant, hopefully some of the river otters. The only caveat with this tour, however, is that it starts at 4 a.m. Because if you'd like to see the birds before they leave, you'll have to leave early so that you can see when they set off just before sunrise. The second option is that to Iwokrama, the Iwokrama Forest Reserve. And that is a flight from Ogle Airport for about 1 hour and 15 minutes to Iwokrama. And there are 2 options on that particular tour. One, to do a hike up Turtle Mountain. It's about 1,000 feet high. And it gives you a wonderful view of the rainforest when you get at the top of the what we call Turtle Mountain. And the other option would be to do a nature walk and see a bit as well of some of the rock carvings, the petroglyphs on the river, done by our indigenous ancestors. So I encourage you to think of these 2 options, and if you will be here, I'm speaking particularly and directly to the foreign delegates. If you have an interest, you can kind of sideways come to me, and I will link you with the persons who are organizing the tours, and it will give you perhaps a wonderful taste of the tepuis, the intricate wetland systems, the, what was the term, rainforest cathedrals, and the rolling savannas about which Kemraj spoke. So can you continue this session by asking Mr. Kaveh Zahidi, Director of the Office of Climate Change, Biodiversity and Environment of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, to come to the podium and to share his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. My heart sank when I was watching Kemrad's presentation with the beautiful pictures and everything. I thought, oh my God, I've got to go after that. But it just got worse and worse, because now you've got images of the beauty of the country and the tour, and you're thinking, which one do I take? Option A, option B? If it's option B, is it option BA or BB? And so I've lost you already. I'll try to recapture you, but it's not going to be easy. Maybe the way I can hook you back in is by reminding you that what I'm going to talk about was something that President Duque referred to, and I'm very grateful to him for doing that, which is bringing food, agriculture, food security back into this discussion that we're having today. Because we all know that biodiversity is deeply rooted into the socioeconomic fabric of our agri-food systems. This is why conservation, but also sustainable use of biodiversity have to go hand in hand. It's very important to meet the 30% protection target. But it's equally important not to forget the other 70% and the interplay between the 30 and the 70%. Because we cannot feed the world, of course, without biodiversity, as it forms the foundation of our agri-food systems, underpinning production and consumption of food and nutrition. We've heard so much about the ecosystem services. They are also necessary for agricultural production, water, climate regulation, nutrient cycling, pest control, pollination. All of this are the services that biodiversity provides to our food and agriculture. But at the same time, transforming our agri-food systems is critical to reversing biodiversity loss, and it's going to be key to achieving the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Because over half of the global biodiversity framework's targets are directly linked to agri-food systems. We simply cannot succeed with the GBF without bringing fully into play agri-food systems. Agri-food systems have to be a critical ally to deliver on a wide range of targets, including ecosystem restoration, invasive alien species, pollution, genetic resources that were mentioned earlier on, including genetic resources for food and agriculture, soil health, and pollination, to name but a few. At its core, what I'm talking about are biodiversity-friendly practices, like agroecology, sustainable intensification, promotion of local seeds and crop varieties, and protecting pollinators. Adopting these practices ensures our productive systems work with nature and not against it. One way of looking at this is what is now being termed the bioeconomy. The bioeconomy offers a transformative pathway to harness the power of biological resources, knowledge, and processes to create sustainable solutions for food, for feed, fiber, and fuel. By advancing the bioeconomy, we can promote innovative uses of biodiversity, from valorizing agricultural byproducts to developing bio-based alternatives, biomaterials, and the like. This approach, of course, is going to be able to foster economies that regenerate natural capital and conserve biodiversity. So the integration between biodiversity and agri-food systems is absolutely crucial to enable countries not just to meet the GBF, but also to leverage finance for actions that deliver on the global biodiversity framework, including through sustainable agriculture practices. That's why we've put a lot of effort at FAO in creating a program called the Agri-MBSAP Support Initiative to really provide this targeted support to countries to integrate agriculture into their plans, the MBSAP that was mentioned earlier on, and to make sure that that's one other additional way of leveraging finance into ultimately safeguarding our biodiversity. Let me finish by just saying that aligning agricultural policies and investments with biodiversity goals to accelerate progress towards a sustainable, resilient, food-secure future, I hope, will be something that the Alliance can carry forward, because sustainable agri-food systems built around the sustainable use of biodiversity can be a cornerstone of our fight against biodiversity loss, and of course the work of the Alliance. And please do count on the Food and Agriculture Organization as an ally in this endeavor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Zahidi, for those words. You are indeed, the FAO, a wonderful ally and continues to be to the work of government of Guyana in areas of food security, forest conservation, and so many other areas. So thank you. May we now move on to Ms. Sunaina Pai Okalan, sorry if I mispronounced your name, Senior Director, Corporate Strategy and Climate Change of HES Corporation, another wonderful partner to the government of Guyana.
Thanks, Vanessa. Distinguished delegates. It's an honor to be here and represent HES, which I'm happy to say has now merged with Chevron as of Friday of last week after a grueling 20 months. So really happy about that. You heard a few numbers here today. The 1 million species that are at risk of extinction. Pradeepa mentioned that, President Ali mentioned that. I'll add 2 more numbers to that. By 2050, it is estimated that climate change will increase the risk of species extinction by 15 to 40%. That's a really large number. And now studies show that over half of the global GDP is highly dependent or moderately dependent on nature and its services. So with that context, I want to highlight 2 simple ways in how the private sector can help achieve these goals. First, by helping scale up voluntary markets, whether it's carbon or it's biodiversity. In that vein, in 2021, HES signed a $750 million forward offtake commitment with the government of Guyana to save existing forests here in Guyana. Avoided deforestation has the same potential net emissions reductions to 2030 as wind or solar. Yet, while investments in wind and solar will reach $450 million in 2025, avoiding deforestation investments will be a mere $2 to $3 million in the same year. Voluntary markets play a role in closing the gap in climate finance. President Ali mentioned the $700 billion finance gap to close the biodiversity gap. That's 100 deals like the one we did with the government of Guyana every year. So clearly voluntary markets have to scale up and the private sector has to step up. As population and GDP continue to grow, recognizing that we are currently sitting in the fastest growing GDP in the world, previously protected areas will come under increasing threat of disturbance, and we must appropriately incentivize preserving nature. Carbon markets historically have had a bias towards regions that have had higher historical deforestation rates, allowing for higher credit generation per unit area. However, HFLD countries such as Guyana are global biodiversity strongholds. Supporting nations like these are essential. The second way that companies and private sector can contribute is in line with what Prime Minister from Barbados mentioned. Companies like ours need to integrate biodiversity into our risk frameworks and treat nature-related risks, as core business risks in decision-making. At HES, we have done exactly that with each incremental development that we undertake. In summary, biodiversity preservation is critically important in the face of global population growth. Let this summit and this alliance be a call to action. We must continue to develop voluntary markets and have the public and private sector work together to achieve these goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunaina, for those words, for helping us to keep focused on the context of this whole initiative. I call on one of our development partners now, country representative, Ms. Lorena Solorzano Salazar. Oh, sorry, I know I've corrupted your name and I'm getting quite tongue-tied. But you are representing the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank. My apologies, Lorena.
Don't worry, that's why here in Guyana I'm just known as Lorena. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues and leaders of our hemisphere, thank you very much for having us. And on behalf of President Ilan Goldfan, the President of the Inter-American Development Bank, it's an honor to stand here before you today to bring some of our remarks. I would say more of the reinforcement of what has been said and how our commitment towards biodiversity keeps on spot. So, as you know, Guyana stands as a beacon of biodiversity in the Western Hemisphere. Imagine a nation where pristine rainforest, it covers more than 85% of the land, largely intact, sheltering over 900 birds species, 250 mammals, among thousands of unique species, right? New species are being discovered in Guyana and also in other countries in the Latin Americans and also in the Caribbean every year. So the biodiversity is dense, and I think that it's also a region that is confronting a biodiversity crisis of historic proportions, right? Latin America and the Caribbean is a nature powerhouse, home of 40% of the Earth of biodiversity in this hemisphere. But it also has been suffering 95% of collapse in wildlife population since 1970. The steppe is declining in the region, species and deforestation, nature disasters, and unsustainable resources use. So this is a call for action for everybody, right? Key areas to consider: the Mesoamerica biological corridor, the Amazon basin, the Gran Chaco in the south of the South America, the reef and the nature in the oceans in the Caribbean. So unique habitats. The good news is that actions in the countries are aware and are embracing and taking actions. So over 20 countries have committed to protect 30% of their land and seas by 2030. So it's a good news in many expanding their national reserves, parks, marine protected areas. In August 2023, 8 Amazon countries convened in Belém and pledged to end deforestation in the Amazon, which is accelerating the green development and aligning their ambitions to GBF Target 3. So ecosystem services, water regulations, carbon credits, biodiversity, flora and fauna, structure, species, population identifying, habitat connectivity under a resilient management of the habitats, human well-being, and bioeconomies diversifying. So restoration is an effort in this area, so has to be acknowledged, right?
Look at us as allies.
We as a development bank, I would like to mention some of the initiatives because we can take part of these initiatives. So how we at the IDB are working on this to support the efforts of the countries. And I'm very happy to listen several of the representatives of the countries, the president, the prime ministers, and the ministers. For example, I don't need to speak in details because they already did. We have supported Barbados with the debt swap for nature. In Ecuador, the conservation and also debt for climate swap. So it's very important. It's not just about the debt swap, but also it's how the conservancy in the Galapagos Islands, right? In Belize also we supported to develop the debt swap, right? And the blue bond, sorry. The blue bond in Belize. So there are practical areas that we can also are contributing in these efforts, right? Also recognizing that the Amazon is the lungs of the earth. We identify and implement an initiative that is called the Amazon Forever program that launched to safeguard the Amazon region and support its people. This initiative has today 5 billion for the next 2 years initially. Today we have 270 projects around the 8 countries in the Amazon basin supporting and promoting deforestation-free growth and strengthening climate resilience, support to indigenous stewardships across the countries. Also, the bioeconomy in the Amazon is relevant because it's not just keeping the forest, but also the wellness of the population around the Amazon. So through the Green Climate Funds, also we create 600 million program to unlock private capital for sustainable enterprise in 6 Amazon nations. So it's not just a matter of the government, but also the contribution of the private sector, agroforestry, forestry to ecotourism in the area, so working hand in hand as a collaborative. The other step that we at the IDB took was within our institutional strategy today. The natural capital and that biodiversity is part of our strategy. It's one of the pillars of the institutional strategy, and also we have an action plan on how we can work together with the governors in the countries. Biodiversity is relevant, so it's not just a matter of development capacity, but how we can support different projects in these areas. Our NDBs, it's not just the IDB, but all the NDBs, we are talking about metrics, frameworks for nature finance, both to simplify the development of financial products, such as bonds, biodiversity credits, results-based funding, but and it's very interesting, and they are going to be presented during COP30. In addition, as I said, it's not just the public sector, but also the contribution of the private sector. In the private sector, our private sector arm of the bank, IDB Invest, we have launched the private sector innovation and a sustainable private sector bond to finance forest-friendly businesses in the Amazon region, right? So it is something that is feasible and is done. So in Brazil, for example, some companies are already using this initiative. The other is interesting of biodiversity, thinking about the mapping, and I'm very happy to hear that Yale is partnering in this initiative. For one example is in Colombia. Last year, we started a program of outcome-based financing under the Jaguar Impact Initiative. So thinking about taking the Jaguar that is in 18 countries, we started in Colombia, right? Incorporating biodiversity, climate, and socioeconomic impacts. And right now it's co-investors from the public sector as well as from the private sector. So those are kind of the different practical things that the bank is doing, and rethinking how we can support and strengthen the efforts and alignment in the financial aspect of with the nature like never before has been supported, right? So looking ahead of COP30, I think that we have an interesting agenda. So in closing, overcoming biodiversity loss is not only an urgent necessity, but also an achievable goal. The science is unequivocal, the policy tools are available, and countries are changing regulations and laws to enforce those areas, and the financial mechanisms that we still are gaining and thinking how we can support these efforts. So I will say that together, let us turn this summit into a launch pad for the new area of ecological stewardship, so that the future of generations inherited not a depleted planet, but one that is rich in life with opportunities and hope. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Lorena, for sharing that perspective from the IDB. Colleagues, we've had some, since the summit started and we went into the plenary, we've had the perspectives of heads of state, policymakers, heads of government, other officials, ministerial and diplomatic representatives from international organizations, from the United Nations itself. And now we've also been hearing from think tanks, from research institutions, from development partners. And now I call to the podium Mr. Derek John. He's the chairman of the National Tushaus Council. Essentially, he is the chief of chiefs for Guyana, the indigenous peoples. I invite him. Is he? Yes. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Excellencies, development partners, indigenous leaders, friends from far and near. A special good afternoon to you this afternoon. It's an honor for me to stand here before you, not only as the chairman of the National Tushao Council, but a proud representative of the indigenous peoples of Guyana. We are the guardians of our forests, our rivers, our biodiversity, and our traditional knowledge system. For generations, our communities have lived in harmony with nature, protecting what the world now sees as vital for the survival of our planet. Biodiversity is not a new concept to us. It is the foundation of our lives, from the medicines in the forests to the balance of the ecosystems, to our cultural practices and spiritual values. Biodiversity is in our DNA. Today, the world faces a crisis of extinction and climate change. Yet in Guyana, we are proving that another way is possible. Through the low carbon development strategy, indigenous voices and leadership are central to how we pursue development without destroying the ecosystems that sustain us. Our village manage more than 15% of our national territory. Many of us now hold legal title to our lands that have long been protected and now continue to steward as part of the global response to climate change. Under the LCDS 2030 and through Guyana's pioneering carbon credit initiatives, indigenous communities are receiving direct financial benefits for keeping forests standing. These funds are decided by us at the village level and support priorities which we choose: livelihoods, food security, ecosystem restoration, ecotourism, and many others. We celebrate the creation of a new unprotected conserve area, co-designed and co-managed with indigenous leaders, and the integration of our traditional knowledge into national conservation efforts. This is a model that we can learn from: protecting rights, valuing knowledge, and building partnerships rooted in trust. Let me be clear, protecting biodiversity is not only about science and policy, it's about justice, inclusion, and respect for rights of indigenous people. We are not stakeholders, we are right holders. In Guyana, we are ready to share our experience and show leadership on how community-level conservation can make a big difference in conserving the world's biodiversity. As we gather here in our beautiful country of Guyana, let this summit send a very strong message that indigenous-led conservation is effective, equitable, and essential, and that when we listen to those who live closest to nature, we all can move closer to a more sustainable and just future. I thank you so much.
Thank you, Tushao, Derek John. We continually extend our gratitude to our indigenous peoples for their traditional knowledge, their stewardship, and indeed their way of life that has ensured that Guyana can speak of the biodiversity upon which we all depend. Now we will skip that recorded message, if we all have the same program, and move on to Mr. James Cooper, Head of Organization, EMEA Environmental Products, Mercuria, Sylvania. James?
Excellencies, Madam Chair, colleagues, I speak today on behalf of Sylvania, a nature-based investment vehicle deploying an initial $500 million into nature-based strategies globally. I wanted to offer just a few thoughts from the private sector perspective that I hope can inform discussion here at the GBA. In particular, as we do see the GBA as uniquely positioned to help provide the leadership necessary to attract private capital into nature and biodiversity markets. The first is that we need mandatory policy signals, both locally and globally. Recent history has shown that, bar some notable leadership and efforts by the likes of Hess, voluntary efforts alone will not create investable opportunities. Results-based finance in its various forms will be mobilized at scale only when we have either strong national mandates or international obligations that require companies not just to disclose, but to act. Secondly, we need trusted and interoperable data and standards. It's inevitable that the metrics we use to account for biodiversity will inherently be diverse themselves. But we need to avoid this creating a fragmented landscape of metrics or reporting standards that don't allow cross-reporting or use of various claims stemming from results-based finance across geographies. And this can be achieved through alignment of the TNFD, GBF targets, national reporting, and also needs to be done using open data sources, particularly to enable access in the Global South. Thirdly, we need to meet the market where it is and to use blended finance to unlock early action. This doesn't mean investors want to be de-risked. Results-based finance models have shown historically that models such as contracts for difference represent a capital-light method to provide the certainty that investors need of business models that are investable. Investors are happy to take project performance risk, but the uncertainty of whether those business models will have longevity isn't something many investors are willing to accept. And lastly, we need to connect, not silo, biodiversity and carbon markets. Yes, there are differences, and yes, biodiversity is more complex and less fungible, but we cannot afford two parallel systems that don't talk to each other. Nature-based carbon markets are a powerful delivery mechanism, as Guyana has shown, and if we embed biodiversity integrity from the start, then if we can scale and reduce complexity and adopt, to the extent possible, common metrics, this nuanced approach can reflect both the carbon and biodiversity value in a single currency that can work in numerous contexts. If we act now and with the right standards and the right incentives and partnerships, we do believe biodiversity can move from the margins of finance to its mainstream. And per Sanjan's comment earlier, we are looking at biodiversity as an investment opportunity, and we don't shy away from that fact. We think that is what will bring scalable finance alongside public sector money to tackle the challenge that we face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper. You know, reflecting on your words and the very tangible contribution that your organization is putting towards this Biodiversity Alliance reminds me of the words of the first chairman of the Diagram International Center for Rainforest Conservation and Development. And one of the quotes we use a lot from him is, "Conservation without money is just a conversation." So thank you very much. We now move on. We're coming toward the end. I know that you're all getting tired, but I'm sure that you will be encouraged with the thought that there's going to be a reception hosted by His Excellency the President for us all this evening. So let's press on. So Ms. Jean Kamau, she's here behind me, Resident Coordinator of United Nations, well, she is the United Nations Resident Coordinator in Guyana, and I believe also representing Suriname, will now come to the podium. Could you join me in welcoming her?
Thank you very much, Program Director Vanessa, President Duque, representatives of the diplomatic missions, Indigenous leaders, distinguished delegates. Thank you very much for staying awake all this time. It's an honor to address this summit at a moment when the state of biodiversity is both sobering and promising. Across the globe, we've seen measurable progress. More countries, like Guyana, are mainstreaming biodiversity into national development strategies. In Guyana, biodiversity is not a concept, it's a way of life. It flows through the rivers, stands tall in the rainforest, sparkles along reef systems, and breathes in communities who have cared for this land for generations. Among them, Indigenous people stand as the original stewards of biodiversity, protecting ecological harmony long before the world named it so. Their knowledge systems, practices, and spiritual connection to the land offer essential guidance on how we regenerate and coexist with nature. Guyana's leadership through its low-carbon development strategy and trailblazing work in biodiversity and carbon credits is showing the world how conservation and development can be allies. Protected areas are expanding, communities are harnessing nature-based solutions, financial tools such as biodiversity credits are gaining traction, and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework has become our rallying blueprint for global action. Yet progress exists around profound challenges. Biodiversity continues to decline at unprecedented rates, driven by climate change, unsustainable land use, pollution, and habitat degradation. Indigenous communities, those central to conservation, often remain excluded from decision-making. And while global targets like the 30x30 provide direction, many nations face gaps in capacity and financing, and data that makes implementation difficult. This is where opportunity emerges. We have the knowledge, we have the frameworks, and we have the will. The opportunity before us is to align ambition with action, to place biodiversity at the heart of climate, agriculture, food systems, and finance, to support Indigenous leadership, integrate community wisdom, and transform ecological stewardship into inclusive prosperity. Guyana offers lessons. Its low-carbon development strategy is coupling conservation with growth. Its leadership in biodiversity credits shows the world how ecological wealth can uplift development and economies. And its deep partnership with Indigenous people sets a standard for equity-driven action. The UN system is ready to translate global frameworks into national realities, to support data systems, community-led monitoring, and inclusive governance, to unlock financing for countries championing the biodiversity agenda. Today, we shift from vision to action. Let us build a global alliance, not only in name, but in sustained partnership, shared resources, and bold implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jean Njeri Kamau, Resident Coordinator of United Nations. Now let's round off the session with words presented by Dr. Roberto Troya, Senior Vice President of WWF.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Your Excellencies, former President Duque, and President Ali and others who have convened this important meeting. It is a pleasure for us to be here with you and share a couple of thoughts on this final stage of reflections that people have been presenting. It's indeed one of these important moments that we have called the road from Cali to Belém. We're trying to incorporate the notion that Cali was an important stepping stone towards Belém. And the notion of bringing these two conventions together has been super important because we see it as a super Venn diagram coming together, the three conventions from Rio, or the two conventions from Rio plus the sustainability agenda, biodiversity, and climate. And the intersection of the three agendas are really marking the way forward to humanity on achieving important goals as expressed on NDCs, MBSAPs, and SDGs. I just want to highlight three things that I would like to end this conversation with. One, I come from Ecuador, a small country almost the size of Guyana. And when I was a child, I used to fly with my dad to the Amazon, and people who know Ecuador will know that Guyana looks very much like Ecuador in many ways. And when I flew over Ecuador, at that age, I saw this forest coverage, and I repeated that flight with my son many years after, and we saw lots of things that were changed. We saw infrastructure, we saw cities coming, colonization, we saw rivers that were polluted, and the most incredible thing we saw was destruction of rivers due to illegal gold mining. When we were coming here to this venue yesterday, together with some colleagues, I see Gabriel Quijandre over there, the head of IUCN, and Mauricio. Actually, we were in the same plane with President Duque. We saw from the window the plane in the middle of nowhere. I don't know if it was in Venezuela or in Guyana, but we saw what we thought was illegal mining. And I pointed and I took pictures of it. My reflection at the time was, oh, look at that. It's in the middle of nowhere. How do you get to those places? And Gabriel, who happens to be a former Minister of Environment in Peru, he said, that's nothing with what's happening in Madre de Dios in Peru. And if you Google pictures of illegal gold mining in Peru, you'll see that it's impressive what's happening there. I'm mentioning this because there is a gap, and I think President Duque was mentioning that we should advance the notion of just reaching 2030 to find out what's going on. I think we take your message, President, in the way that we need to do things right now because there is a gap between the level of speech, the level of desire with the level of actual delivery. And we need to close the gap immediately or as fast as we can. Which brings me to what Mr. Kevin said just before about the vision that President at the time, Jagdeo, Vice President now brought to the table. Oh, there you are. He visited our office in Washington, D.C., President Jagdeo, and he shared that vision. This is 2000 and should be 2010 or something like that. And he was expressing how much pushback he was getting from many people. But continuity of purpose has been super important. And now with President Ali, that continuity of purpose is showing results and actual impact in this country. I'm mentioning a lot President Duque because he also was continuing something that we started and we have started in many countries, what we call project finance for permanence, or PFPs. Herencia Colombia is one of those, and President Duque led one of those important efforts that would support the maintenance of 42 million hectares in protected areas, but would add 32 more million hectares of protected areas to the country, and mobilize close to $350 million in resources, including the iconic carbon tax that would feed the flow of funds to that fund. I'm mentioning that because continuity of purpose and delivery and vision are super important. Finally, I would like to, I started mentioning my country, Ecuador. I would like to mention the role of the youth. I'm super impressed with our Vice President, Maria Jose. She brings something that we need to think about in terms of bringing the youth into the decision-making processes. And not only the youth, but also other sorts or other parts of the social scheme. In that sense, local communities have been mentioned and are in the front and center of the Target 3 of the biodiversity framework. We should remember that they are in the front and center, and they don't need an invitation, they have their own seat, as the person who spoke on behalf of the indigenous people put it. Science is telling us that we're losing biodiversity at big chunks. We have the Living Planet Index report. Unfortunately, in Latin America, the species we have studied in the last 20 years are telling us that we're losing almost 94% of the species studied, which is a sample of the bigger picture of species, but that is the canary on the mine. And I think Mauricio and others mentioned it. We have to be specific, steady in the things that we are accomplishing and keep going in order to achieve the results we want. Thank you, Guyana, for putting this conference together, and happy to keep supporting you in this quest. Thank you.
Our sincere thanks to you, Dr. Troya and WWF, for indeed being wonderful partners as well to Guyana and Guyana's work. Now, colleagues, we will transition to the signing of a letter of intent between the government of Guyana and Sylvania. And Kevin, you can come to the podium now.
Thanks a lot, everyone. So first of all, I was the first person to speak after the Vice President, which is never a good speaking slot because you get shadowed by the brilliance. Now I'm the last person to speak before you all have to go to reception, but this is for our third signing of the day. We've had 3 signings today. They've all had incredible value. The signing the declaration obviously is hugely important because it aligns all of the founder members to an extremely important global goal. But a lot of people have said that this alliance is about practicality. So that practicality comes down in 2 ways. One is around science and one is around money and investment. And we had earlier on the really landmark signing with Yale University, which is all around the science. Now is the third signing, which is around investment and getting serious about making the vision something that can be implemented through partnership like I was talking about earlier on. So we're really delighted that we will now have the signing of a letter of intent between the government of Guyana through the Environmental Protection Agency and Sylvania. As you heard earlier on, Sylvania is mobilizing $500 million in investment globally for nature-based solutions. I think the President said earlier on they're walking the walk. So this signature of a letter of intent between Guyana and Sylvania is a measure of how we hope to pioneer walking that walk. The LOI will be released this evening and you'll see all the detail in it, but it's really about taking the partnership forward around some innovation. So perhaps if we could make sure that somebody photographs it, we will have the signing, and then this will be the end of the day, finishing on a high note just before Pradeepa steps back in to close the day off. So they're kind of lofty up there in the clouds, but I think they deserve a big round of applause. It says Pradeepa here. Okay, so you're close enough. So it's Vanessa that's between you and the reception, not me.
Thank you, Kevin. Congratulations, EPA and Sylvania, for that signing of the letter of intent. Hope you like to, I'm sure you'd like to take a photograph. But now, ladies and gentlemen, I know it's been a long day for you and we really should close off. So we will push some of these, the sessions that we have remaining for today over to tomorrow. We will rework the agenda and give you the assurance that you will have the opportunity to hear and participate and reflect on the presentations in each of the respective sessions. There is this evening a reception hosted by His Excellency the President at his official residence. I believe each and every one of you would have received an invitation. If you haven't, please indicate to us. Pradeepa, perhaps you or Raja? No, let me ask Raja. Raja, can you please stand? So if anyone in the room hasn't received an invitation for the reception this evening, just kindly indicate to Raja, reach out to him, and he will ensure that you get one. Okay? Thank you. And I really thank you for your participation and attention in today's proceedings throughout. It's been a long day. You've had a late lunch, but I hope that it was still enjoyable. And I'm sure that, you know, persons like yourselves who continually participated in events such as these also see this as opportunities to engage with different persons on the sidelines. So I'd like to recognize, for instance, Mr. Kenny David, who is Assistant Commissioner of Forests for the Guyana Forestry Commission. Can you please stand? So persons who are interested in forestry. Mr. Edward Gobadan, the Commissioner, was here earlier. I'm sure he'll be here tomorrow. Who else can I shout out? Is anyone here from the Indian delegation? Yes. Welcome. You've made quite a long journey. And we are very excited to have you here. I believe it's the Indian Space Research Organization. Please reach out to him. Who else should I give a shout out to as we wrap up? Professor Paulette Baino, Dean of the Graduate Studies in the Faculty of Earth and Environmental Science, University of Guyana. Please stand, ma'am. I believe that's it for now. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much for your participation today. Do have an enjoyable evening, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and you will have a different chairperson. So that's the end of me. We will convene again tomorrow. Thank you very, very much. Again, registration will begin at 8, and the sessions will start at 9, hopefully more promptly. Thank you very much, and have a good evening. Enjoy the reception.